The hot July sun felt like a physical weight on Emma Montgomery's neck. It beat down on the dusty jail yard of Redemption Springs, a place that had never lived up to its name. Her wedding dress, once a symbol of hope, was now just a filthy, tattered rag, a mockery of the happiest day of her life. Sweat glued the ripped lace to her back, but she refused to look away. She wouldn't give the gawking townsfolk the satisfaction of seeing her break. For 3 days, she'd been chained in this yard like a dog, a carnival sideshow for a crime she didn't commit. It was 1878. Justice in the Wyoming Territory wasn't about right and wrong. It was about who had the power and who held the grudges. And right now, the town's corrupt mayor and his jilted son held a powerful grudge against her. "Water for the prisoner," a voice announced. Deputy Mills approached with a ladle. His eyes held a flicker of something. Sympathy, maybe, but not enough to risk his job. Not enough to speak out against the sham trial that put her here. Emma's parched lips cracked as she accepted the water. It was the only kindness she'd known in 3 days. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. "Don't thank me," the deputy muttered, his eyes darting around the yard. "Sheriff says you'll be sold tomorrow, to cover your debts, if no one pays the fine." She closed her eyes. Sold. The word was a physical blow. The fine was a joke, an impossible sum. $500 for stealing Mayor Hopkins' prized pocket watch. A watch she knew for a fact was still in the pocket of his drunken son, Elijah. The same man who tried to force himself on her the night before her wedding. Her intended Charles Wilson had vanished at the first sign of trouble. "Can't marry a thief, Emma," he'd said, his voice loud enough for the whole town to hear, as the sheriff dragged her from the church steps. 6 years. 6 years of courtship, of planning a life, erased in a single sentence. The distant sound of hooves cut through the haze. A lone rider was approaching, a silhouette against the warped horizon, tall and straight in the saddle of a powerful chestnut stallion. He rode with a confidence that said he wasn't afraid of trouble. In fact, he probably looked for it. He dismounted in front of the jail, dust swirling around his worn leather boots. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face, but she could feel his eyes on her, on the chains. "Mighty peculiar way to treat a lady," he said. His voice was deep, with a hint of a southern drawl. Deputy Mills puffed out his chest. "Town business, mister. Nothing that concerns drifters." The stranger took off his hat. His face was weathered by the sun, with a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble. But his eyes, they were a startling, piercing blue. He was younger than she'd first thought, maybe 30. "Name's Reese Yates," he said, his voice calm, ignoring the deputy completely. "And I make it my business when I see a woman chained up like a rabid wolf." He turned those blue eyes to Emma. "What's your crime, ma'am?" Before she could answer, Sheriff Thornton stomped out of the jailhouse. His hand was resting on his holstered pistol, a clear threat. "This is a legal detention, stranger. Miss Montgomery here was caught stealing from our esteemed mayor. Trial's been held. Sentence passed." The sheriff smirked. "Unless you're here to pay her fine, I suggest you move along." Emma watched as the stranger, Reese, studied her face. He looked at her like he was reading a book, searching for something in her eyes. Whatever he found there made his jaw tighten. "How much?" he asked. Sheriff Thornton laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. $500 plus court costs." To Emma's shock, Reese Yates didn't even blink. He just reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a heavy leather pouch. "I'll need a receipt," he said, his voice as cool as a mountain stream. "And those chains removed. Immediately." The sheriff's jaw dropped. "Now wait just a minute. You can't just—" "I believe that's exactly how your law works, isn't it?" Reese interrupted, his eyes like ice. "Fines paid. Prisoner goes free. Unless there's some other Redemption Spring statute I'm not aware of." A crowd was gathering now. Whispers turned into murmurs. Emma held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. The sheriff's face was turning a deep, ugly red. "You got no idea what you're involving yourself in," Thornton growled. Reese ignored him. He walked to the sheriff's desk inside the jail and began counting out gold coins. The sound of them hitting the wood echoed in the silent yard. $550, he announced. That should cover your costs. He turned to Emma, and for the first time, she saw a flicker of a smile. Miss Montgomery, I believe you're free to go. The sheriff looked like he was about to explode, but the eyes of the town were on him. The gold was on his desk. With a reluctant, angry snarl, he nodded at Deputy Mills. The deputy fumbled with the key. A moment later, the iron cuffs fell away from Emma's wrists, leaving raw, red skin behind. She rubbed them, overwhelmed, wary of this man who had appeared like an answered prayer. Why would you do this? She asked as he guided her toward his horse. You don't even know me. Reese didn't look at her. He was watching the sheriff. Let's just say I recognize a frame-up when I see one. And I've got a particular dislike for men who abuse their power. He lifted her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. Hold tight, Miss Montgomery. We're leaving town. She didn't hesitate. She gripped the saddle horn as Reese urged the powerful horse forward. Behind them, the sheriff was shouting, his words lost in the thunder of hooves. They galloped out of Redemption Springs, away from the chains, away from the nightmare. But Emma had a terrible feeling this was far from over. As they cleared the town limits, she glanced back. Sheriff Thornton wasn't just shouting anymore. He was getting a posse together. They were being hunted. The chestnut stallion was a force of nature, eating up the miles, its powerful legs carrying them across the open plains. Emma sat stiffly in the saddle, the stranger's chest a solid wall against her back, his arms a cage around her as he held the reins. The wind whipped the tattered remains of her wedding dress, a constant, painful reminder of her humiliation. They're coming after us, she said, her voice tight with fear. I know, Reese answered, his voice calm, steady. He hadn't so much as glanced behind them, but he rode with an unnerving certainty. Thornton's not the type to let $500 in a prize prisoner just ride away. So what do? We ride faster, he said simply. The sun began to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and blood red. The land grew rougher, broken by rocky outcrops and deep gullies. Reese pushed the horse harder, weaving through the treacherous terrain with a skill that spoke of years spent in the saddle. The sound of pursuit was a faint but constant drumbeat behind them, a promise of violence that kept them moving. Just when Emma thought her spine would shatter from the relentless pace, Reese pulled the horse to a sudden halt behind a tall spine of rock. What is it? She whispered, her heart leaping into her throat. Shh, he commanded. He dismounted in a single fluid motion, pulling a long rifle from his saddle scabbard. Stay on the horse. Don't make a sound. He crept to the edge of the rock and peered around it. Emma strained her ears, hearing nothing but the wind and the horse's heavy breathing. Then she heard it, the jingle of harnesses, the low murmur of voices. The posse was close, too close. She watched Reese's back, the muscles coiled tight beneath his shirt. He was a predator, waiting, assessing. He raised the rifle to his shoulder, then lowered it again, a silent curse on his lips. He came back to the horse, his face grim. Too many of them. 7 riders. We can't fight them. So we run? We get smarter, he replied. He led the horse into a narrow ravine, the rock walls rising high on either side. They moved slowly, carefully, the horse's hooves muffled by the sandy ground. It was nearly dark now, the world reduced to shades of gray and black. After what felt like an eternity, the ravine opened up. They were in a small, hidden valley, a sliver of moon providing the only light. Reese finally let out a long breath. We're safe for now. They'll have to wait for morning to pick up our trail again. He helped her down from the horse. Her legs, unaccustomed to riding, buckled beneath her. He caught her easily, his hands firm on her waist. For a moment they stood there, his face inches from hers in the darkness. Thank you, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He just nodded, his eyes scanning the darkness around them. He was never at rest, always watching. He built a small, smokeless fire, then produced jerky and a canteen of water. As they ate, the silence stretched between them. You need to tell me everything, he said finally. Why would the mayor of a town want to sell a school teacher? So she told him about Elijah's crude advances, about her rejection, about the prize pocket watch, about Charles and his cowardice. When she finished, the fire had burned down to embers, and the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken anger. It's not just about his son's pride, Vernon, Reese said, his voice a low growl. A $500 fine for a pocket watch. That's not justice. That's a purchase. He looked at her, his blue eyes glinting in the firelight. They weren't just punishing you, Miss Montgomery. They were acquiring you. A cold dread washed over her. But why? Before he could answer, a sound made them both freeze. The unmistakable click of a rifle hammer being cocked. Well, well, look what we have here. Sheriff Thornton stepped out from the shadows, his rifle aimed directly at Reese's chest. 6 other men fanned out behind him, their guns all pointing the same way. Drop the gun, Yates, the sheriff sneered. Your little joyride is over. Reese didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his hand hovering just inches from the pistol at his hip. Emma's blood ran cold. This was it. They were trapped, outnumbered. I paid the fine, Thornton, Reese said, his voice dangerously calm. She's a free woman. The fine was paid with stolen money, the sheriff declared, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. We have a witness who saw you leaving the bank 2 nights ago. You're a bank robber, Yates. And you, he said, turning his cold eyes on Emma, are an accomplice. You're both going to hang. It was a lie, a blatant, impossible lie. Reese hadn't even been in the territory 2 nights ago. But it didn't matter. In this part of Wyoming, Thornton's word was law. Now, are you going to drop the gun, the sheriff said, or do my men have to open you up right here? Reese slowly raised his hands, his eyes locked on Thornton. It was a surrender, a hopeless, bitter end to their desperate flight. But then something strange happened. From the darkness above them, on the ridge of the valley, a new voice called out, a voice of crisp military authority. Sheriff Thornton, you and your men will lay down your weapons, now! Everyone looked up. Silhouetted against the moonlit sky were a dozen uniformed soldiers, U.S. cavalry, and they all had their rifles trained on the posse. Thornton's face went pale. What in the hell? An officer, distinguished by the insignia on his uniform, stepped forward on the ridge. You are interfering with a federal matter, Sheriff. This man, he said, gesturing down at Reese, is under our protection. The officer turned his gaze to Reese. Good to see you, Captain. We were beginning to worry. He saluted, and in the stunned silence of the hidden valley, Emma looked at Reese Yates, at Captain Yates, and realized the drifter who had saved her was nothing like what he seemed. He wasn't just a man with a fast horse and a pouch full of gold. He was a soldier, an officer, and Sheriff Thornton didn't just look surprised. He looked terrified. The standoff was electric. Sheriff Thornton and his posse, caught between a man they thought was a drifter and a full dozen cavalry troopers on the ridge above. The hunters had become the hunted. Thornton's face was a mask of confusion and fury. Captain, what is this nonsense? This man is a bank robber. The cavalry officer on the ridge didn't lower his rifle. My orders are to assist Captain Yates in any way he requires. His authority in this territory supersedes yours, Sheriff. Now, for the last time, lay down your weapons. One by one, Thornton's men looked at their sheriff, then at the rifles aimed at them, and reluctantly lowered their guns. Thornton, his face purple with rage, was the last to drop his rifle in the dust. This is an outrage, he sputtered. I'll have your stripes for this, soldier. The officer ignored him. Captain Yates, your orders? Reese finally stood up, moving with a calm deliberation that was more intimidating than any threat. He walked over to Thornton and picked up the sheriff's rifle. My orders, he said, his voice low and cold, are that you and your men will turn around and ride back to Redemption Springs. You will forget you ever saw us. If I hear so much as a whisper that you've come looking for me or Miss Montgomery again, these soldiers won't be the ones who come for you. I will. The threat hung in the air, heavy and absolute. Without another word, Reese gestured with the rifle, and the posse, grumbling and defeated, mounted their horses and rode back into the darkness. The cavalry officer and 2 of his men made their way down into the valley. Sorry for the delay, Captain, the officer said. Your message took a while to reach us? Reese nodded, his eyes still fixed on the trail the posse had taken. No harm done, Lieutenant. Your timing was impeccable. Emma watched this exchange in stunned silence. Captain, Federal matter. Superseded authority. The words swam in her head. Who was this man? Reese seemed to remember she was there. He turned to her, his expression unreadable. It seems you're safe, Miss Montgomery. The lieutenant looked at Emma, then back at Reese, a question in his eyes. Is this the situation you mentioned in your wire? It is, Reese said. She'll be traveling with me. We'll need a fresh horse. The lieutenant nodded. We have a spare mount at our camp just over the ridge. You're welcome to our supplies as well, sir. Thank you, Lieutenant. That will be all. Carry on with your patrol. The soldiers saluted, then melted back into the night, leaving Emma and Reese alone once more. The fire had died completely, and the valley was silent save for the chirping of crickets. You're not a drifter, Emma said. It wasn't a question. No, he admitted. You're a captain in the U.S. Army. He hesitated for a long moment, staring into the darkness. Not exactly. The uniform gets people's attention, makes them ask fewer questions. Then who are you? She pressed, her voice rising. What is all this? What federal matter? Reese finally looked at her, and the guarded expression was gone. In its place was a weariness that seemed to go bone deep. My name is Reese Yates, and I work for the territorial governor. My job is to hunt monsters. He let that sink in. Men who use their power, their badge, to create little kingdoms of filth. Men who get rich off the misery of others. Men like Mayor Hopkins and Sheriff Thornton. Emma's mind was reeling. You were investigating them? That's why you were in Redemption Springs? Yes, he said. For months we've been hearing whispers about illegal taxes, about miners disappearing, about land being stolen from homesteaders. It all pointed back to Redemption Springs. I came to gather proof. He kicked at the dead embers of the fire. But I didn't know how deep it went, or how depraved they were, until I saw you. Saw me? Chained in that yard, he said, his voice turning hard. A woman in a wedding dress, being treated like an animal. It wasn't just cruelty. It was a message, a display of absolute power. That's when I knew this wasn't just about stolen money or land. This was about something much darker. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out one of the gold coins he'd used to pay her fine. He tossed it to her. In the faint moonlight, she saw it wasn't a standard U.S. coin. It was stamped with a strange symbol, a coiled snake eating its own tail. What is this? She asked. That, Reese said, his voice grim, is the mark of the Black Creek Raiders. The outlaw gang? I thought the Army wiped them out years ago. They wiped out most of them, he corrected, but some survived. They scattered, took new names, and put their stolen gold to work. They didn't just want to rob banks anymore. They wanted to own them. They wanted to own towns. The horrifying truth began to dawn on Emma. You think Hopkins and Thornton? I don't think, Reese said. I know. The gold I paid your fine with was recovered from a raider payroll I intercepted last year. When I threw it on Thornton's desk, I wasn't just paying a fine. I was sending a message. I was telling him I knew who he was. He looked at her, his expression deadly serious. And now he knows that I know, which means neither of us is safe. They won't stop hunting us now, not until we're dead. Emma stared at the coin in her hand, the coiled snake. She wasn't just a victim of a corrupt mayor. She had stumbled into the middle of a war she never knew existed, and her rescuer. He wasn't a hero who had come to save her. He was a soldier who had just dragged her onto the front lines. The revelation settled over the small valley like a shroud. The world Emma had known, a world of books and lesson plans, of courtship and church socials, had been a facade. Beneath it lay a secret war, fought in the shadows by men like Reese, against an enemy that wore the face of law and order. So the theft charge, the fine, she started, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. It was never about a pocket watch, Reese finished for her. It was about you, or something you have. My guess would be land. Your family's homestead? Emma was an orphan. Her parents had come west from Boston, building a small ranch before influenza took them both. My father's ranch is just a small parcel of land north of town. Is it near Black Creek? The name sent a shiver down her spine. Yes, it borders it. Then that's it, Reese said, his voice tight. The raiders use those canyons to hide their gold. There must be a stash on or near your property. They couldn't take the land from you legally, so they found another way. They discredit you, fine you an impossible amount, and when you can't pay, the town, meaning them, seizes the property to cover your debt. It was so simple, so evil. But Charles, my fiancé, was he part of it? Reese's gaze was sharp. Think, Emma, did he ever pressure you to sell the land? Did he seem overly interested in your property? She thought back. Charles had always called it her little inheritance. He'd offered to manage it for her after they were married. He'd said it was too much for a woman to handle alone. At the time, she'd thought it was protective. Now it felt sinister. I think he was, she whispered, the betrayal a fresh, deep wound. He abandoned me so quickly. He was probably ordered to, Reese said grimly. When you rejected Elijah, the plan changed. Charles was no longer needed. The cold, calculated cruelty of it all was staggering. They hadn't just framed her. They had dismantled her life, piece by piece, all for a patch of dirt that might hold buried gold. So what do we do now? She asked, her voice trembling. We can't go back. We can't go forward. They're everywhere. Not everywhere, Reese said. He was thinking, his mind working quickly. The Sullivans, the friends I was taking you to, Tom and Marjorie. They're good people, but I can't lead this trouble to their door. Hopkins would burn them out without a second thought. He paced the small clearing. There's only one move left. We have to go on the offensive. We have to cut the head off the snake. How? It's us against a whole town. Not the whole town, he corrected. Just the ones at the top. Hopkins, Thornton, and their inner circle. Most of the folks in Redemption Springs are just like you. Scared. Bullied into silence. He stopped pacing and looked at her. There was one person who showed you sympathy. The deputy. Mills. He gave me water, Emma remembered. But he was terrified. Fear can be a powerful motivator, Reese said. So can a guilty conscience. He's our only way in. If I can get to him, maybe I can turn him. Get him to testify about what he knows. It was a long shot. A desperate gamble. It's too dangerous, Emma said. They'll be watching for you. They'll kill you on sight. They'll be watching for me, he said, a new plan forming in his eyes. A man riding alone, but they won't be looking for a woman. Emma's breath caught. No, absolutely not. Listen to me, Emma, he said, his voice urgent. I need to get back into that town, and I need a diversion. A big one. There's a town 30 miles north of here. Pine Creek. The people there have no love for Redemption Springs. Bad blood over water rights. I need you to ride there. Take this. He handed her a sealed letter. Find the blacksmith. A man named Bedford. Give this to him and only him. Tell him everything. He's a friend. He'll know what to do. And what will you do? While they're chasing you, I'll be slipping back into town. I'll find Deputy Mills. They'll catch me, she said, panic rising in her voice. No, they won't, he said, his confidence unwavering. He went to the cavalry's spare horse, a fast-looking bay mare. This horse is fresh. You'll ride hard and you'll ride north. They'll assume we're still together. They'll send the posse after the trail you leave. It will buy me the time I need. He was asking her to be bait, to ride alone into the wilderness, hunted, while he walked back into the viper's nest. It was insane. It was suicide. But as she looked into his determined blue eyes, she saw he wasn't asking. He was telling her. This was the only way. He quickly transferred a small bedroll and a canteen to the mare's saddle. He then unstrapped his own gun belt and held it out to her. No, she said, shaking her head. You'll need it. I have another, he said, patting a small pistol tucked into his boot. You, on the other hand, are riding into hostile territory. Do you know how to use one of these? My father taught me to shoot a rifle for hunting, but a pistol. Point and pull the trigger, he said grimly. Don't hesitate. Don't think. Just point and pull. He buckled the heavy belt around her waist. It felt alien and terrifying. a piece of his world now weighing her down. "Ride north," he repeated, his hands on her shoulders. "Don't stop until you reach Pine Creek. Find Bedford. He'll help you." He looked at her then, a long, searching look. In the pale moonlight, she could see the cost of this life etched on his face, the scars, the lines of exhaustion, the profound loneliness. "Be safe, Emma," he whispered. He lifted her into the saddle. For a moment, his hand lingered on hers. Then he slapped the horse's rump, and the mare shot forward, carrying her out of the valley and into the darkness. She didn't look back. She couldn't. She just rode, the cold night air stinging her face, the weight of the pistol at her hip a terrifying promise. She was no longer a victim. She was a messenger, a decoy, a soldier in a war she was just beginning to understand. The mare was fast, her hooves a frantic rhythm against the hard-packed earth. Emma rode with a singular focus. The image of Reese walking back toward Redemption Springs burned into her mind. Every mile she covered was another minute of safety for him, another tick of the clock in his desperate plan. The landscape was a blur of moon-slicked rocks and skeletal trees. The fear was a living thing inside her, a cold knot in her stomach. But she pushed it down. She had a mission. Find Bedford. Hours passed. The moon sank, and the first hint of dawn began to bleed across the eastern sky. She was exhausted, her body screaming in protest, but she didn't slow down. Sometime after sunrise, she crested a small hill and saw it in the distance, the thin plume of smoke that signaled a town. Pine Creek. Relief washed over her, so potent it almost made her weep. But the relief was short-lived. A single rider emerged from a copse of trees to her right, blocking her path. It wasn't the sheriff. It wasn't the posse. It was Elijah Hopkins. Emma's hand flew to the pistol at her hip. Elijah held up his hands, his face pale and slick with sweat. He looked nothing like the arrogant bully from the jail yard. He looked like a scared rabbit. "Wait, don't shoot," he pleaded. "I'm not here to hurt you." "I find that hard to believe," Emma said, her voice shaking but firm. She kept her hand on the gun. "You have to listen to me," he said, his horse dancing nervously. "My father, he's gone crazy. After Yates made a fool of them, him and Thornton. They're not just trying to catch him anymore. They're going to kill him. They've sent word to other associates, men you don't want to meet." Emma stared at him, suspicion warring with a new, sharper fear. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I'm out," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "I never wanted any of this. The land, the gold. I saw you, and I was a drunken fool. But this? Killing a federal agent? This is too far. They'll hang us all." He was terrified. His fear was genuine. "My father keeps a ledger," he said, leaning forward in his saddle. "Everything is in it. The names, the properties, the gold shipments. It's the proof Yates needs. The proof the governor needs to bring them all down." "Where is it?" Emma demanded. "It's not where you'd think," Elijah said, his eyes darting around nervously. "It's not in the mayor's office or the bank. It's hidden in the old abandoned church, the one at the edge of town." The church. The place where she was supposed to have been married. The irony was a bitter pill. "He's walking into a trap," Elijah said. "They know he's coming back. They're waiting for him. You have to warn him." He seemed about to say more, but his eyes suddenly went wide with terror, looking at something over Emma's shoulder. "Get down!" he screamed. A rifle shot cracked through the morning air. It wasn't aimed at her. Elijah was thrown back in his saddle as if punched, a dark red stain blossoming on his chest. He stared at her, his mouth open in a silent scream, before toppling sideways and crashing to the ground. Emma didn't think. She reacted. She dug her heels into the mare's sides, a second shot kicking up dirt right where she'd been. She crouched low over the horse's neck, urging it into a desperate gallop toward the town. She didn't dare look back at the sniper in the hills, or at the body of the man who had tried, too late, to do the right thing. She burst into Pine Creek like a storm, the horse lathered, her hair wild, the pistol still clutched in her hand. People scattered before her. She paid them no mind. She scanned the buildings, looking for a blacksmith shop. She saw the sign, a simple hammer and anvil, and yanked the mare to a halt in front of it. A mountain of a man with a thick beard and arms like tree trunks emerged from the forge, a hammer in his hand. "What in tarnation? Are you Bedford?" she gasped, stumbling from the saddle. The man's eyes narrowed. "Who's asking?" "Reese Yates sent me," she said, thrusting the crumpled letter into his hand. "He's in trouble. They're going to kill him." Bedford's entire demeanor changed. The folksy blacksmith vanished, replaced by a man with the cold, hard eyes of a lawman. He ripped open the letter, his eyes scanning it quickly. He looked from the letter to Emma, his gaze taking in her torn dress, the gun at her hip, the terror in her eyes. "Damn fool was never one for patience," he growled. He turned and bellowed into the forge. "Clancy, saddle the horses! We ride now!" He turned back to Emma. "Tell me everything, fast," she told him. About the raiders, about the trap, about Elijah, and the ledger hidden in the church. As she spoke, two other hard-faced men emerged from the back of the forge, checking their rifles with grim efficiency. Pine Creek's blacksmith shop was clearly more than it appeared. Just as she finished, a young boy came running from the telegraph office down the street. "Mr. Bedford, telegram for you. It's marked urgent from the U.S. Marshal's office in Kansas City." Bedford snatched the paper from the boy's hand. He read it, and all the color drained from his face. He looked at Emma, and his expression was one of pure horror. "What is it?" she asked. He handed her the telegram. "It's about the man Reese quit over, James Blackwell, the one who was hanged." Emma read the words, and her blood turned to ice. "Former partner of James Blackwell apprehended. Full confession obtained. Confesses to Kansas City bank robbery and murder. Names accomplice in that crime, a former associate known as Sheriff Thornton of Redemption Springs." It was suddenly so much bigger than a land grab. Thornton wasn't just a corrupt sheriff. He was a killer, a murderer with a badge who had let an innocent man hang for his crime. And Reese was walking right back into his web. "He's not just going to kill him," Bedford said, his voice a low, terrible growl. "He's going to make him suffer." He looked at the men who had gathered. They were no longer a small posse. They were an execution squad. "Let's ride," Bedford said, "and pray we're not too late." The ride back towards Redemption Springs was a desperate, frantic blur. Bedford and his men were grim-faced and silent, pushing their horses to their absolute limit. Emma rode with them, the pearl-handled pistol now tucked into her dress, the cold steel a constant reminder of the world she had been thrust into. She was no longer just a decoy. She was part of the cavalry. They were still miles from the town when they heard it, the distant, unmistakable crackle of gunfire. "They've started," Bedford said, his face a grim mask. "Spur your horses." They crested a ridge and saw the town below them. It wasn't a trap waiting to be sprung. It was a war zone. Puffs of smoke erupted from windows and rooftops. Men were crouched behind water troughs and overturned wagons, exchanging fire. And at the center of it all was the jailhouse. Its windows were shattered, its facade pockmarked with bullet holes. It was a fortress under siege. Reese was in there. "Damn fool," Bedford muttered, but there was a note of admiration in his voice. "He didn't sneak in. He kicked the damn door down." "What's the plan?" one of his men asked. "The plan," Bedford said, pulling his rifle from its scabbard, "is to introduce ourselves." They charged down the hill, screaming, their sudden appearance throwing the attackers into chaos. The men laying siege to the jailhouse turned, surprised, their attention diverted. It was the opening Reese needed. The jailhouse door burst open and he emerged, firing a pistol in each hand, a ghost of a grin on his face. The fight was brutal and swift. Bedford's men were professionals, moving with a deadly efficiency that overwhelmed Thornton's thugs. Emma took cover behind a stack of barrels, her heart hammering. She watched as Reese moved through the chaos, a whirlwind of controlled violence. He wasn't just a soldier, he was an artist of destruction. She saw Charles, her former fiancé, trying to sneak away. He wasn't fighting, he was running. Emma stepped out from behind the barrels, the small pistol in her hand. "Charles!" she yelled. He froze, turning to face her. His face was a mess of fear and desperation. "Emma, thank God! You have to help me. They made me do it, I swear." "I saw you, Charles," she said, her voice cold as ice. I saw you with them, taking their gold. The lie died on his lips. His eyes darted past her, looking for an escape. He made a sudden move, lunging for her. He thought she was still the timid schoolteacher. He was wrong. She fired the pistol. The sound was deafening. The shot went wide, kicking up dirt by his feet, but it was enough. He stumbled back, falling to the ground, his face a mask of shocked terror. Bedford's men were on him in a second, hauling him to his feet. The main firefight was dying down. Most of Thornton's men were down or had surrendered, but the sheriff himself was nowhere to be seen. Then a new sound cut through the air, a high-pitched scream. From the general store, Sheriff Thornton emerged. He wasn't alone. He had a hostage, a little girl, no older than 7, held tight against his chest, a massive pistol pressed to her head. "Everybody back off!" Thornton screamed, his eyes wild with desperation. "Or the girl dies!" Reese froze. So did Bedford. All guns were lowered. Thornton began to back away, dragging the crying child with him, using her as a human shield. "I'm walking out of here," he snarled. "Anyone follows, she's dead." He was going to get away. After everything, the murders, the corruption, he was going to walk away. Emma watched from her position near the barrels. Thornton was focused on Reese and Bedford. He was keeping the child's body between himself and them, but from her angle, from the side. She had a shot, a small one, a difficult one, a shot at his shoulder, the arm holding the gun. She remembered Reese's words. Last resort. No alternative. This was it. Her hands were shaking. The little girl was crying. Thornton was still backing away. 1 step, 2 steps. Emma raised the pearl-handled pistol. She took a deep breath, just as her father had taught her. She let it out slowly. She ignored the chaos. She ignored the fear. She saw only the target. She squeezed the trigger. The bullet struck true. Thornton screamed in pain, his arm going limp. The pistol clattered to the ground. The little girl, freed, ran sobbing toward her mother, who had been watching in horror from a nearby doorway. Before Thornton could recover, Reese was on him, a single brutal punch sending the sheriff crashing to the ground unconscious. It was over. Silence fell over the dusty street of Redemption Springs, a silence broken only by the whimpering of the wounded and the sobbing of the little girl. The snake was well and truly dead. In the aftermath, as Bedford and his men rounded up the last of the gang, Emma stood by the barrels, the small pistol hanging limply in her hand. The smoke cleared. The adrenaline faded, leaving a profound, bone-deep exhaustion in its place. Reese walked toward her, his face smudged with gunpowder, a cut bleeding freely on his forehead. He stopped in front of her, saying nothing. He just looked at her, his blue eyes filled with something she had never seen before. Not just gratitude, not just affection, it was awe. He gently took the pistol from her hand. "You saved that girl's life," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You taught me how," she whispered. Bedford approached them, clapping Reese on the shoulder. "It's done, son. We found the ledger in the church. It's all here. Enough to put Hopkins and his entire network away for 100 years. He grinned. "The governor is going to be very pleased, especially when he hears how his own son cleaned up the mess." Emma stared at Reese. His son? Reese had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I may have left out a few details," he admitted. "My father is Governor Yates. He sent me to handle this." Quietly. The son of the governor, working undercover as a ghost agent. It was another layer to the mystery, another piece of the puzzle that was Reese Yates. "Well," Bedford said, "your quiet little operation ended with the loudest damn firefight this territory has seen in a decade." He looked from Reese to Emma, a knowing smile on his face. "But I'd say the results speak for themselves." Reese's eyes never left Emma's face. He took her hand, his thumb gently tracing the raw skin on her wrist where the shackles had been. "My father is going to want to meet the woman who saved his son and single-handedly dismantled the Black Creek Raiders," he said softly. He gave her a slow, weary smile. "But I think he can wait. I was told there's a good school in a town called Pine Creek that's in need of a teacher." He squeezed her hand. And I happen to know there's a new marshal's position opening up there. A man could put down roots in a town like that, if he had a reason to. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the battered town. The battle was over. The war for them was won. Standing in the dust and the silence, Emma looked at the governor's son, the soldier, the man who had ridden into her life and shattered it, only to piece it back together into something stronger and truer than it had ever been before. "Is that a proposal, Mr. Yates?" she asked, a small smile playing on her lips. "It's a beginning, Miss Montgomery," he answered, his eyes full of promises. "If you're willing to take a chance on it." And Emma, who had faced down liars, kidnappers, and killers, who had been chained and hunted and had come out the other side, knew this was the one gamble she was more than willing to take. If you believe a story born in chaos can end in peace, show some love and hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments. At what moment did you realize Emma was no longer a damsel in distress?